Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this series of professional learning shorts on teacher tips for family communication. My name is Taya Haller and I'll be guiding you through this video module, First Things First, the benefits and barriers. The overarching goal of this series is to strengthen communication between teachers and families in order to support and enhance student learning. The information and activities in this PL short have been aligned to the CEC and Cedar Center's high leverage practices and New Jersey's professional teaching standards referenced at the end. Because we know that professional learning must be interactive and relevant for it to be meaningful, the objectives of this video module are based on a praxis framework, inviting you into a process of reflecting on your core beliefs and experiences regarding family communication and exploring educational research about the benefits of and barriers to effective communication with families in order to take action that will overcome a relevant barrier and transform communication with your learners' families moving forward. There will be moments when we ask you to pause the video in order to engage more fully in this process. Ideally, this process of reflection, information, and action is not solitary but communal. Therefore, there will also be moments throughout when we encourage you to connect with others as part of this process as well, particularly trusted colleagues who are pursuing the same goal of transforming their communication with families. With that in mind, you'll get the most out of this PL short if you have the following resources readily on hand to mark up. The Communicating with Families inventory, which you used during the initial reflection in our series preview, and the professional learning guide that corresponds with this video. Feel free to pause the video now to print these resources or open them with the PDF annotation tool. Let's start with reflection. Feel free to use the reflection pages of your PL guide as you consider these ideas. Based on your experience and current context, how would you complete the following statements? Communicating with families is beneficial because communicating with families is hard because. To what extent do the following statements resonate with you? All families value education and desire to support their children's learning. All families are capable of supporting their children's learning. Children in all grade levels benefit from teacher-family communication. Families are equal partners with school staff in their children's education. The responsibility for nurturing and maintaining positive family-school relationships rests primarily with school staff, and the power dynamic between school staff and families often reflects historical racial, class, and educational hierarchies. Feel free to pause this video while you complete this reflection exercise. We appreciate your honesty during the reflective exercise. As we turn our attention to educational research, feel free to use your PL guide to jot down any notes. Just as we teach our students to adopt a questioning stance when they approach nonfiction text, we should approach research and new information in the same way. Using the big questions proposed by Kylene Beers and Robert E. Probst can help us critically reflect on what's been presented, so we'll provide time for you to consider these questions. What surprised you? And what changed, challenged, or confirmed what you already knew or have experienced? First, we'll take a look at the educational research regarding the benefits of communicating with families. A meta-analysis of 51 research studies examining the effect of parent and community involvement on students' academic achievement found a positive and convincing relationship between family involvement and benefits for students. These benefits included higher grade point averages and scores on standardized test or rating scales, enrollment in more challenging academic programs, more classes passed and more credit earned, better attendance, improved behavior at home and at school, and better social skills and adaptation to school. They found that this relationship holds across families of all economic, racial, ethnic, and educational backgrounds, and for students of all ages. A 15-year longitudinal study by the Consortium on Chicago School Research identified 5 essential factors of school improvement and student achievement. One of those essential features was having strong ties between school professionals, parents, and community members. They also noted that the quality of these ties was directly linked to student motivation and school participation. Let's pause to process this information and how it compares with your own experience regarding the benefits of communicating with families. Did anything surprise you? Did anything change or challenge what you already knew or had experienced? Did anything confirm your own experiences and knowledge? If you are engaging in this series with others, this would be a great discussion to have together. Feel free to pause this video to jot down your responses or share them with a trusted colleague. Now let's take a look at the research on barriers to effective communication. The 4 barriers we'll consider today are stress overload, language differences, teachers' core beliefs, and historical power dynamics. The first barrier likely comes right to mind, particularly during the current COVID-19 crisis. Teachers and families are experiencing stress overload as they navigate between in-person, hybrid, and remote classes, as well as numerous other changes that have been brought by the pandemic. Even during normal times, teachers feel overwhelmed by the many expectations and tasks placed upon them. Amidst all the other responsibilities, it is easy for intentional communication with families to fall through the cracks. However, investing in the time and energy to communicate with families now means we can reap the long-term benefits later. For example, many teachers note that, quote, the extra work they put in to partner with families ultimately decreases their workload and makes their jobs more enjoyable and fulfilling, end quote. Research also indicates that, quote, teachers stay at schools where they have strong partnerships with families of their students, end quote, suggesting that such partnerships contribute to a positive and productive working environment. Many families are also feeling overwhelmed due to numerous responsibilities for family and work, financial stresses, and other commitments. Particularly in the current pandemic, it's important to remember that families may be struggling with the additional responsibility of around-the-clock childcare, caring for elderly parents, figuring out the at-home logistics of hybrid or remote education, changes in their employment or job expectations, navigating unforeseen health challenges, grieving losses big and small, and trauma they've experienced throughout the past year. A second barrier to effective communication is language differences, particularly when communicating with families for whom English is a second language. Other language differences include accessibility challenges to printed, auditory, or complex language, the use of educational jargon that school staff are accustomed to but with which families may not be familiar, and language that excludes or stigmatizes students and their families, even if it is not the intention to do so. A third potential barrier to effective communication is teachers' core beliefs about their students' families and the value of partnering with them. The research and practice of Dr. Karen L. Mapp of the Harvard Graduate School of Education points to 4 essential core beliefs for teachers who desire strong partnerships with their students' families. Without these core beliefs, educators cannot build meaningful relationships with families. Take a minute to consider the 4 essential core beliefs identified by Dr. Mapp. Working to grow in these mindsets is particularly important for educators who are from different racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and educational backgrounds from the families their school serves. Dr. Mapp explains that responsibility for cultivating and sustaining partnerships rests primarily with school staff because many families in marginalized communities have experienced trauma and disrespect in schools. This means teachers and school staff must earn their trust over time. It also points to the last barrier to effective communication that we'll discuss today, historical power dynamics in schools. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, during the 2017-2018 school year, the majority of public school students were students of color, but the majority of their teachers and principals were white. Researchers refer to the skills and assets we gain from our social and cultural background as social capital. Studies show that white families' social capital is more aligned with those of the predominantly white school staff members, making it easier for them to build effective family-school partnerships. These dynamics create a social capital disconnect between families of color and the predominantly white school staff members, creating a negative influence on the family's relationship with the school and perpetuating inequalities. Let's pause here to process this information. As a quick recap, the 4 barriers to effective communication we identified were stress overload, language differences, teachers' core beliefs, and historical power dynamics. Take a minute to jot down your response to this information. Did anything surprise you? Did anything change or challenge what you already knew or have experienced? Did anything confirm your own experiences and knowledge? If you are engaging in this series with others, this would be a great discussion to have together. Feel free to pause this video to jot down your responses or share them with a trusted colleague. We'll end by developing a short action plan. First, take a minute to revisit the Communicating with Families inventory, Part 2. When considering the benefits of and barriers to effective communication, did any new vulnerabilities, strengths, needs come to mind throughout this video module? Can you think of any other supports that may be available to you in meeting these needs or other strategies that you could use? Take a minute to pause this video if needed to jot down any new thoughts that come to mind. Use this page on your PL guide to map out the next steps you may take toward overcoming some of the barriers to effective communication. As we recommend a couple of possibilities, check off any actions that fit your needs and the needs of your students' families. One next step is to consider the accessibility of your language. For example, do you know each of your students' families' preferred language? Are you able to communicate in this language, or do you have access to translation services that will enable you to do so? Can you learn a few key phrases such as, "Hello, I'm your child's teacher," "I'll call back with someone who speaks," fill in home language, and "thank you"? How could you simplify your use of language to make it more accessible when communicating with students' families? It can be easy to fall into the habit of using educational jargon without realizing it. A helpful exercise may be to use guidelines by the Center for Plain Language to evaluate the language in your back-to-school letter or a recent email you sent to students' family members. For example, did you use short sentences, words that are familiar to your audience, and text features such as bullet points, lists, and headings? Did you clearly state if there was something you wanted them to do? Finally, what kind of inclusive language do you use or need to use? One type of inclusive language to keep in mind when working with students with identified disabilities is person-first language, which places the child rather than the disability first. For example, we would say a child with a disability rather than a disabled child. This is true of any disability or health condition, such as a student with ADHD or a student who uses a wheelchair, etc. While person-first language has been widely accepted by professionals working with individuals with disabilities for decades, it's important to note that more recently, some self-advocates have voiced a preference for identity-first language because they view their diagnosis as a trait that defines their identity, much like other core identity traits such as race, gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity. This is more common in some communities, such as the autistic and deaf communities. As older students grow in self-advocacy, follow their lead with language preferences, or ask them if they have a preference between person-first language and identity-first language. If you're interested in learning more, check out this resource by the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network under Helpful Resources on your PL Guide. Another next step to consider is examining your assumptions and biases. We may want to believe that we aren't influenced by biases, but the truth is that all of us have them. As teachers, it's essential for us to become aware of our biases so that we can address them head-on. There are numerous online tools available to help people grow in their awareness of unconscious bias. Two that were specifically designed for teachers include the Challenging Assumptions tool by the Flamboyant Foundation and the Common Belief Survey by Teaching Tolerance. Links to both of these resources are under Helpful Resources on your PL Guide. The Challenging Assumptions tool is on pages 10 to 11 of the Flamboyant Foundation's Academic Partnering Toolkit for Teachers. The Common Belief Survey by Teaching Tolerance includes a Teacher Voices worksheet and discussion prompts, as well as directions for individual use. Taking the time to honestly reflect with one of these tools is an important step toward examining your assumptions and biases. If you are engaging in this series with others in your professional learning community, consider sharing your experiences with one of these tools if there is a high level of trust. The Common Belief Survey includes discussion questions you could use together. For those who may want to do a deeper dive into examining your assumptions and biases, consider borrowing one of these books from the LRC-South. Relevant sections of these books are included on your PL Guide along with information about how to borrow them. One more step could be to learn more about your school district. For instance, you could explore the demographics of families in your school district using the LRC-South District Demographic Dashboard. Simply type in your school district, and this site will show you the median household income, statistics on race and ethnicity, broadband internet access, the extent to which English is spoken at home, poverty rates, and educational attainment. Recognizing how your students' families may differ than your own will help you be more intentional about your use of language and examining your own assumptions and biases. You could also explore the demographics of staff members in your school district using the NJDOE certificated staff data and compare this to the demographics of your students' families. Click on the year you're interested in viewing and download the Excel spreadsheet. This will show you the number and percentage of administrators, special service providers, teachers, and supervisors or coordinators by ethnicity. An insightful exercise would be to compare this data with the LRC-South data about your students' families. Is there evidence of historical power dynamics at play? What do you think are the implications of this comparison for effective teacher-family communication? Based on your inventory of vulnerabilities and needs, along with our recommendations, what are your next steps? What can you do to proactively overcome one of the barriers to effective communication? Be as specific as you can so that you have a clear, concrete plan in place. Take a minute to pause this video if needed to think about and write down your next steps. Thank you for joining us. Keep the Communicating with Families inventory on hand for the next PL Short of your choice in the series.